Good morning, my name's Bruce, and if I haven't met you before, I'd love to meet you today. I'm a teacher at Langley Christian School, and I have 4 children. 3 of them are here with me this morning, and the other one is with my wife Cynthia in Calgary, and I've been alone since Wednesday trying to raise my 3 children. And my oldest daughter, Allie, who's here this morning, at least 3 times has said, "Dad, do I need to be the mom and get things done around here? Take care of your children. Get this done." And to be perfectly honest, I had a really long, intense week at work, at home, just a whole bunch of things. And being at home church this morning, you hear me say this often, it's just so refreshing to be here. You don't know what was planned for this morning. But I just need to tell you that everything to this point has just been incredible. The words of the songs, that video with David Attenborough, all the things that have been part of this service this morning have just been tugging on my heart and have been really making me think more about what I want to talk about today. And right now I feel like I could go in 100 directions. So we'll see where this goes. My children said, "Dad, we have to be out of here at 10 to 12. And so it's probably a good thing they told me that, because I'm feeling like I'm going to get a little ramped up today. I told Pastor Jim that today might be the day that I preach. Not just teach, but do a little bit of preaching. So we'll see how it goes. The fall of 1986, I was sitting at a table at Canadian Nazarene College, a Bible school I went to in Winnipeg, and lunch had ended, and there was only 3 of us sitting there together around a table. The food had been taken back from the cafeteria. Most of the students had trickled off to their classes, and I remember sitting there having a conversation with a couple of really good friends, and for the past 3 weeks, I had been chasing this girl named Rose Edwards, who was this cute little blonde bombshell, and I thought that in my second year of school, it was time for a girlfriend. It was time for a relationship. It was time to get serious about thinking about my future and marriage and all of those good things. And through the cafeteria walked this tall, striking brunette, and she was moving quickly, clearly late for a class that she had to get to. And I didn't really take much notice of her until one of the people that I was sitting with said, "Wow, she looks great when she's all dressed up." And I knew who this girl was, but I had never really noticed her. So I'd seen her, I'd probably even talked to her, but there wasn't that little recognition of, I wonder what it's like to be a part of her life. And I remember looking up and watching her go halfway through the cafeteria and out the door, and I knew that I wanted to get to know her better. And her name was Cynthia, and it just happens to be the same name as my wife. And it was just before Thanksgiving weekend, and I was coming from Winnipeg back to Victoria, my hometown, for the weekend with a couple of friends. We were going to drive straight through, and I made a promise to myself, when I return to Bible school after Thanksgiving weekend, I'm going to ask her out on a date. So I had hours and hours of driving, a number of days, almost a week to think about how this was all going to unfold. And so I began to plot and scheme and brainstorm. How could I wine and dine and impress and meet and just have this incredible date with this girl named Cynthia, who, the more I thought about, the more I realized, this is an amazing woman. Now, I was basing everything strictly on appearance. I really had no conversation with her other than, "Hi, how are you?" just in passing. And so I began to, in my mind, imagine what the date might look like, where we might go, what we might do together. Would we go for a walk? Would I hold her hand? Maybe would I be able to kiss her? I mean, all these things I'm creating. And so when I came back to Bible school, after the Thanksgiving weekend, one thing led to another, and I asked her to go to a concert that a few of us were going to. Some of you might remember the Imperials, Christian band. This was the year that they had kind of made a turn, and they had gone from, I guess, gospel music isn't the right word. I'm not sure how to describe it. Someone can tell me afterwards. But they went a little bit more contemporary. They kind of pushed out a young lead singer, kind of hyped up the band a little bit, and the guys that had been part of that quartet, I think only one was left, and he kind of sung in the background. So it was kind of this Christian band that was kind of an up-and-comer for young adults. And so we went. I don't remember what they sang. I just remember sitting beside Cynthia and just enjoying being with her. And again, there wasn't a chance to talk very much because we were listening to music. But afterwards, I had decided I was going to take her out to a great little pizza restaurant just down the road. And we were going to have an intimate, one-on-one, romantic evening. No loud music, no other people around, just the two of us sitting across a booth talking. After the concert, we jumped into my Datsun 1976 B210, 4-gear, standard car, my pride and joy. And as we were leaving, I made sure I ran around the side and opened up the door for her because it had to be just right. I'd thought this through. I wasn't going to miss anything. Nothing was going to be left that could go wrong. And it was cold, getting cold because it was Winnipeg. And so I was kind of moving in a hurry, and I opened the door, and she kind of jumped in, and one fluid motion, I just kind of kept moving and slammed that door, and I heard, "Ah!" And her leg was still outside the door, and I just slammed her leg in the door. I was like, oh my goodness, what have I done? Any chance of a romantic evening is dead. So I sheepishly went around and opened the door and just kind of sat down and stared straight ahead, and I wasn't even sure if I should make eye contact anymore. And looking out the window, I just went, "Are you okay?" And being a gracious date on the first date, she said, "Yes, I'm fine. The bruises will heal." And so off we went to the little pizza restaurant, and we went in, sat down, and I looked across the table and opened up the menu, and I said, "What should we get?" And she goes, "I don't know, why don't you choose?" So I picked a seafood pizza, and we began to eat our seafood pizza, and we engaged in conversation. Later on, quite a while later on, she told me that she hated seafood pizza. But that was down the road. And I remember after we had our seafood pizza, we went to a park and we went for a walk and we swung on some swings, and I got to hold her hand, and I even gave her a short kiss. And that whole evening was about romancing this beautiful girl and trying to plan, prepare, make everything just right. And as some of you may know, those dates don't always go just right for whatever reason. Maybe the way they end, maybe when you slam a leg in a car door, whatever it might be. Things don't go well. Well, history paints an interesting picture of romance. Because I don't know if you've thought about it, but the way you and I understand romance has not been around for a real long time. In fact, back in the European Middle Ages, in the 13th, 14th century, the idea of romance, as I just described, this kind of high time, exciting moments, planning, preparing, energy, whatever, however you want to describe it, was really reserved for affairs, adulterous relationships, lust. It wasn't something that you sought after for a marriage or a relationship that was going to be stable and long-lasting. Really, marriage, or that bond between a man and a woman, was really an economic union. It was an opportunity for you to pool your resources, your abilities, and to come together and have a responsible marriage where you could work together, raise children, be contributors to the community. So the idea of romance really wasn't part of marriage as we would see it today. And in fact, if you were a member of a medieval guild, a baker, a butcher, a blacksmith, a carpenter, you had to be married in order to get your final master acceptance in that guild, because being married showed that you were economically stable and that you were responsible, you were stable, you're going to stay in the community, and it was just another sign that you were ready to be part of the guild. Well, slowly that idea began to change, and as we get into the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era, romance begins to become part of marriage. Princess Victoria and her husband-to-be, Prince Albert, had this elaborate wedding. The gown, everything just in place and perfect. And they began to shape, at least England, with this idea of marriage contained this important element of romance and planning and wooing, so to speak. As well, women in the industrial age of Europe still didn't have a lot of equality with men. They couldn't vote. They couldn't do the same jobs. Basically, their place was in the home, raising children. And so they began, in order to create some sense of equality, they began to really think of ways, and culture really began to develop ways for women to attract men, to woo them, to endear them. And so the idea of women chasing after the perfect man, attracting a certain man, creating that home, that family that had that romantic ideal, really began to be developed in the Industrial Revolution. And so the notion of a woman being that homemaker, being at home, preparing a wonderful meal for her man, raising the children, greeting him at the door, looking beautiful, really began to come out of the Industrial Revolution when women tried to elevate their status. And so our notion today of romance is really grown out of the popular culture. It's something that's been developed, nurtured. And it's not every culture that has this romantic ideal. It's quite unique to North America, maybe Western Europe. There's lots of cultures today that still would look at our understanding of romance and go, I don't get it. And I learned that when I was in Bible school, when I sat down in that same cafeteria a couple years later after I'd asked Cynthia to marry me, and the big hoo-ha was the engagement ring, right? Let me see the ring. When are you getting married? And there was a man from Kenya who was an international student. His name was Isaac. And he said, tell me about this ring. Tell me about how you proposed. He was really intrigued by that. So I told him all about what we did, and he said, how much did you spend on the ring? That's really what he wanted to know in all this. And I said, well, I got a really good deal on it. It was only $700. He goes, $700? What were you thinking? Do you know what I could do in Kenya with $700? I could buy a truck and take the children to school. I could build a new house. And he went through this big long list of what 700 Canadian dollars could do. And he just looked at me and went, why? Why would you spend $700 on a ring? And I basically said, that's what we do. And he had no clear understanding of the romance that went into wooing a woman, being engaged to a woman, preparing for a wedding. That was all quite foreign to him, that romantic element. So I knew from that point on that romance, the way I know it, is something unique to our culture. And so here we have, in our North American culture, our Canadian culture, this romantic ideal. And when I think back to that first date with Cynthia, I knew more about romance than I did about her before we went on that date. It's kind of strange when you think about it. I knew more about how I wanted to impress her and how I wanted to all look and turn out than I really knew about her as a person. In other words, she really wasn't a friend before we started dating. She just instantly became my date, and then my girlfriend, then my fiance, and then my wife. But I had this ideal in my mind that this is the way it should look, regardless of whether I got to know her or we became friends or we became girlfriend and boyfriend. The romantic ideal. I want to do a little poll with you that I do in my classroom, and we've done this before. Fist to 5. I don't know if you remember this. Fist means no way. Fist, or 5 fingers, means absolutely, totally agree with you. Okay? So here is your first statement. Or you can do any number of fingers in between. I'm kind of on the fence, 3, I'm almost against, 1, and so on. So here's my first question about romance. I think about romance all the time. Fist, never. 5, I'm right there with you. I'm consumed by romance as we know it in North America. Here we go. What's your vote? Or anything in between? Look at this, a 1 and a 4. That's trouble right there. That's trouble. I see lots of 3s and 4s. Okay? Good. Here's my second statement. I like a double fist at the back. He's an angry guy today. We'll talk later. I like vicarious romance. Vicarious means I like living romance through other people, movies, books, magazines. I love reading about the royal family and the romance between Kate and William, all that stuff. Okay? No way. I need the real thing with a real person. 5, I love it. Can't get enough of it. Okay, we got some extremes here. I got fists and 1s and a few 4s and 5s. A couple 3s. Okay? Here's the next statement to agree with or disagree with. Romance, as I've described it, and as we understand it in North America, is important in a human relationship. No, you know what? We can go on without it. 5, it's got to be there. It's a game changer if it's not. Romance in a human relationship. Okay? Good. Here's my last statement. Romance is important in our spiritual relationship with our Creator. No, I haven't even thought about it, don't want to think about it. 5, definitely, in the way I understand romance. All right. Interesting. Lots of 5s. Psalm 16 is a psalm that I've been speaking about for the last couple of months, and I'm going to pull it all together today. And if you haven't been with us, this is how it goes. Keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing. As for the saints who are in the land, they are the glorious ones, in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those will increase who run after other gods. I will not pour out their drinks of blood, nor will I take up their names on my lips. Lord, you are my portion and my cup. You have made my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. My eyes are always on the Lord. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad. My tongue rejoices. My body will rest secure. For you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. I want to suggest, no, more than suggest, I feel really strongly about this, that David was not a romantic the way we understand romance. David was a man, based on the words of this psalm, that believed his time with God was based on knowing God in every single aspect of his life. David had eyes for God. Some of us have eyes for cars. There's a guy I teach with, and he loves cars. And he loves talking about cars, and it just, I don't even care. And I haven't told him that yet, but sooner or later I will. I'll just say, you know what? I don't care about cars. I just want to drive one. But he loves talking about cars, and he looks at cars, and he can tell you why that's a great car, the size of the engine, how well it drives, if it's turbocharged. He's got an eye for cars. Some of us have an ear for things. We have an ear for music. We have an ear for trivia. We can just remember something we hear, or a caption or a TV commercial. That ear is just so well connected to our memory. David's senses, his eyes, his ears, the way he speaks of God, he's consumed by God. And he's not consumed by what he can get from God or an incredible experience he had with God or what he's planning to get or do with God. I believe he's consumed with God because he sees God everywhere he looks. From the beginning of his life to the end of his life. Think about David's life for a moment. Goliath. What an incredible story of faith and understanding as a young boy. Probably 11, 12, 13 years old, youngest boy in his family. Youngest kid always had to look after the sheep. He goes to visit his brothers on the battlefield and goes, "What's going on? You're sitting around." And his brothers go, "You don't know what this Goliath is capable of." And we know the story. David walks down and confronts him one-on-one and basically tells him, "You have defiled the name of my Lord, and today judgment has come." Think about David and Saul, and Saul's son Jonathan, that complicated relationship where David loved Jonathan, but Jonathan's father Saul hated him and hunted him. And David sees God in that situation. Think of David's own son, Absalom, the black sheep of the family. David's other son, Solomon, who ends up building the temple. David's adulterous relationship with Bathsheba and how that caused God to pull away his favor when it came to David being the one to build the temple for the Hebrew people. And in all of this, David can say, "You make known to me the path of life. I've seen you in every single circumstance." And it wasn't the time when things are going great. It wasn't the big events that I planned in my kingdom. It was in every circumstance where I graciously humbled myself. And David is known as the man with the heart after God. He understood what it meant to know God rather than romanticize him. I want to talk about the Christian church for a moment, and then I want to come back to David. And I'm going to take a big shot at the church today. Anybody come from a background that is Lutheran or Presbyterian? Okay, you're off the hook. Anybody Orthodox, Greek, Ukrainian, Russian Orthodox, you're off the hook. Anybody Catholic background? Okay, wow. Okay, you're probably off the hook. I want to take a shot at Protestant, evangelical Christian church. What do I mean by that? Protestant is anybody, is the rest of us, me included. Protestant is anybody who separated from the Catholic Church back in the 16th century. You may not know where that word came from, but that's what it is. So you're not Catholic or Orthodox. Evangelical is this notion that our faith is something that we want to share, make public. It's out there. We are involved in a commitment, a covenant with Christ, and we're part of something. But here's the shot I want to take at the Protestant Evangelical Church of North America. I think we've romanticized our Creator. And I'm going to use the Hebrew word Elohim, only because I think we've completely emptied the word God in our culture, and I want to just stay away from that word today. Elohim, the Hebrew word for Creator God. I think we have been guilty of romanticizing Him, just like I romanticized the date with Cynthia. I was more concerned about how the date went and that certain things happened than actually getting to know her. I think we've been guilty of that. I definitely was raised with that way of thinking, and nobody sat me down and said, this is the way you need to think of God. I just kind of learned it in the Christian culture of my upbringing, Christian school, church, parents, youth group, and I can't put my finger on one thing and say it started there, but by the time I hit 30, I looked at my own understanding of who the Creator was and went, something is not right. Because when I looked around at people who described these incredible experiences at camp, they were saved from this, God blessed them for this, they had an incredible experience at a retreat that changed their life, I went, I don't have it. So what does that mean for me? Does that mean that my faith is so shallow and so small compared to yours because I haven't had these incredible, life-changing, romantic experiences? There's three things that come to mind that I grew up with that kind of reinforce this idea of maybe our understanding isn't quite where it should be. The first one is this: I'm so blessed. We use that language. I've used that language. It's very popular in the North American evangelical Protestant church. And usually, when we say that, we've been blessed with things. It may be people, relationships, but it's usually we're receiving something. Something has entered our life unexpectedly, and we attribute that to our Creator. I think that's awesome that we're blessed. But when we say it, I'm not sure we always receive it knowing who God is and maybe why we attribute that to our Creator. Because the word bless in Hebrew, it comes from the Hebrew word barak. And that word is bigger than just, here you go. Barak is used for the word to kneel. So it has this inference of humility. And the word blessing, whether it's in the Old Testament or the New Testament, when you start putting it all together, you look at the way God blessed Abraham. Wealth, children, descendants. Or the story of Job. He's blessed, everything returns that he lost. And then if you look at blessing in the New Testament, specifically Matthew 5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are persecuted. The idea of blessing is so much bigger. I really see the word blessing as God revealing Himself, letting us know who He is. Blessing is really covenant language. And if you were here last year when I talked about the blood covenant and the 10 steps of the blood covenant, God makes a covenant, and in every part there's some kind of exchange, and blessing goes with that. I think our understanding of blessing is too small. And when we use the language, I'm so blessed, are we simply keeping it to, I got something really great, rather than the source of this blessing is beyond my imagination, is incredible. Here's a second phrase I grew up with. I've been saved. Okay, so talking about that point in our lives where we make a commitment to be a follower of Jesus, where we embrace Scripture, we enter into that covenant that is promised in the Old Testament, is fulfilled with Jesus in the New Testament, when He says at the Last Supper, take this cup the new covenant. Drink it, it's my blood. Take this bread, it's my body. That fulfillment there. We enter into that. But what are we saved from? Are we simply saved from a life that's difficult so we can get to the end and be in heaven? Is that all this life becomes? And I think the Protestant evangelical church in North America, at least in my lifetime, has been guilty of saying, as long as you're in and saved and you know where you're going to end, that's all that matters. We can reap the earth of resources. We can ignore discrimination or abortion or whatever it is. The primary focus is that you as an individual are saved so you know your destination. It's got to be more than that. The Bible is quite clear that people will be condemned as well, or they will condemn themselves for the life they lived, and that there will be a separation. Jesus uses that metaphor of the sheep and the goats. There will be a separation. Jesus makes judgments throughout his life. He curses a fig tree. He curses the Pharisees for their unbelief. There's condemnation in this covenant that we become part of. We can reject the covenant, we can break the covenant, and we can condemn ourselves because of what we rejected. And so when I hear the phrase, I've been saved, that just doesn't sit with me anymore. Because I'm not sure we really understand what we mean by that. Not that it's not true, but is it so small that our focus is this romantic idea of what's at the end? For David, it's the whole thing. You make known to me, not you will make known to me. It's coming up in the future. You have made known to me all the way the path of life. David, when he wrote the psalm, did not have the book of Revelation. So think about all the metaphors and the descriptive language in the book of Revelation, especially in Revelation 21 and 22, talking about the new Jerusalem, the kingdom of God, creation being restored, the river of life, and the 12 trees, and the streets of gold. And we get this incredible understanding of God's throne, of heaven. David didn't have that. And yet, you will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. The Hebrew people believed in the afterlife, but it wasn't the picture that sometimes we generate. This, again, and you might not like the way I'm using this word, this romantic idea of what God has created for us to be a part of. He didn't understand it that way. The third phrase I grew up with is this one. I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That phrase is a powerful phrase, and it's a loaded phrase, and it means a whole bunch of different things. But it's only been around for 60 years. 60 years. It's not in the Bible, that phrase. There are examples, not very many, of a personal encounter with God. Think of Nicodemus. Jesus says you must be born again. Not of water, not from your mother, but by the Spirit. You must be transformed and see the world differently. And then the other big one that I think of is Saul on the road to Damascus when he's on his way to persecute the Christians, and Jesus meets him with a blinding light. His name is changed, his life is changed, the power of Christ does an incredible thing, and he writes a good chunk of the New Testament in response to this. But most of the encounters we see with Jesus are groups, the disciples, families being saved. And this notion of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ really developed in the 1960s with a man by the name of Charles Fuller. He had a radio talk show in California called the Hour of Power. Some of you have probably heard it. Some of you have probably listened to that. And he took a phrase that had started to creep into Christian literature early in the 20th century, and he made it popular. And in order to connect with people in North American culture, he began to use this phrase to describe this covenant, this commitment, this understanding of the Bible and who God was. And it's been with us ever since. The problem in Protestant evangelical churches is that when we hear the word personal, we equate it often with private. And that created a lot of problems for me growing up. Personal devotions, a Bible with my name on it. I mean, on and on I could go. And not that there's anything wrong with those things, but slowly, for the first 30 years of my life, I internalized my faith. Think about how you pray. When you're all by yourself and there's no one around to hear your deepest, darkest hurts, concerns, confessions, do you speak them out loud? Probably not. We internalize it. In grade 2, we learn to read with our eyes and not with our lips. Books, technology, individualism, private space has taught us to internalize a lot of what we do and not to speak it out loud. And I think one thing that we've been guilty of is internalizing our faith, taking this idea of personal and making it completely private. And there is a difference, but I think we forget that. And in Psalm 16, there's not really any indication other than the fact that it was written by one person that David is promoting this idea of a private, personal faith. So where does that leave us? Well, I'm not going to leave you with depressing bad news, ladies and gentlemen. What happens when romance, the way I've described it, you may agree with it, disagree with it. If you disagree with it, come and talk to me later and I'll tell you why you're wrong. But the picture I've painted for you this morning, what happens when our romantic idea of God, based on your background and your upbringing, again, that the Catholics and the Orthodox people and probably the Lutherans and the Presbyterians, you don't have this issue. Just the way that those churches unpack, teach, explain who God is. I think there's more of a consistent understanding of it's a daily. It's part of who we are. We look for God everywhere. But for many of us evangelical Protestant Christians, sometimes we crave those big experiences. We crave a miracle. Let's be honest. God, I need to be healed of this. If you do this in my life, then I will know who you really are. We put out a fleece. If the interview goes well, and my wife says we can move, I'm taking that job. That's my fleece. And we create these expectations for God to do things for us in order for us to accept who He is. A conversation I've been having with my kids is about giving money. At one point, when you are receiving money from a job or allowance or whatever, do you start giving? And their big concern is always, well, when I've got extra, right? And unfortunately, none of us probably grow out of that. Sometimes it's always a struggle. and what we give to God sometimes comes later than it should. What conditions are we setting up like we're romancing God, like we're taking him on a date? And when we don't get that romantic date or that result, where does that leave us? If you're like me, at about age 30, you started to question your faith because you didn't have the experiences, the high times, the romantic encounters, the intimacy, the closeness that you saw in other people or heard when the pastor spoke or on a TV show. This should be a part of your life all the time. And you began to question. And there's nothing wrong with having doubt. I think doubt's a great thing, and you've heard me talk about doubt before. But what happens when you're pushed to the point where I'm not even sure I want to believe anymore? Let me suggest that you simply need a bigger picture. You need a deeper understanding of not what God gives or what you're going to get, but who he is. Because your Christian journey as a follower of Jesus should not be therapy for a broken life. And every single one of us is broken here. It should not be therapy, just get me to the end, talk me through it. It should not be a vacation experience to another faith destination. Those are going to happen, and they're awesome. I could tell you stories where God has met me in a powerful way. However, those can't sustain me. You make known to me the path of life every single day of my life. There's a passage in Proverbs, and I was going to look it up before I spoke today, but I couldn't find it. Here's my paraphrase. I don't even know where it is, but it says this in Proverbs. It is the job of God to create and to hide. It is the job or purpose of humanity to seek it out. I love that. We are looking for God everywhere. Like David, we need that ear to hear, those eyes to see, and we're looking for our Creator. We're looking for Elohim in every aspect of our life. And it can't be those incredible high times, those romantic times that sustain us, but it's got to be the everyday moments where you see it on the face of a stranger, in a good meal, in a great song. And maybe it's not Christian. Maybe it's just a great song with great lyrics, and it makes you think of what it means to be human and to worship God. It might be in a mundane job that you hate doing, but you see the value of work and routine and working alongside of someone. I've said this before, and this idea is really changing me in the last 2 years. If the culmination of creation is Jesus, even if there was no sin in the world, no brokenness in our lives, even if Eden, as described in the book of Genesis with Adam and Eve, the creation story, still existed, Jesus would have come anyways. Jesus is the fullest, richest, best example of creation. And he wasn't plan B. He wasn't, oh man, they screwed up. What am I going to do now? He was always part of the creation story. God becoming flesh. We use that word incarnation. God becoming flesh and dwelling amongst us. And if we take that one step further, if it was always about Jesus coming to earth, what if that was it? What if there was no promise of an afterlife. God comes to earth, lives amongst his creation, and when you live your 70 years or your 30 years or your 90 years, that's it. Would that be enough? I think David would say yes. Because for his time, he saw his Creator in every smile, in every heartache, in every flower, in every instrument that played music. He saw it, he heard it, he understood it. And I ask myself that question more and more. Would it be enough? Because if it's not enough, if I'm relying on this romantic idea of what is to come, and that's sustaining me, I'm probably missing so much every single day. And I don't want to miss out on that. Cynthia and I have been married for almost 24 years. And I can tell you right now, if she relied on my romance to get us through, there'd be a big problem. Now, that's not to say there's no romance in our marriage, but if you have been married for more than, I'm going to say, a year, you know that romance changes. Usually, it decreases, but it also changes and it gets richer. I'm fascinated by going to a restaurant and seeing an older couple, and by older I mean 70s, 80s. And they sit there in the restaurant booth in silence and eat their food. And the first time I ever saw this, I went, Cynthia, shoot me if we ever get that way. Like there's nothing. They're not even looking up, making eye contact. And the first time I noticed that, I went, that's so sad. That's what it's like to be married when you're 75? No thanks. And then I began to realize, as I watched those older couples more, that I believe that there is a sense of intimacy, security, knowing, just in being in one another's presence. You don't even have to say anything. You just know. You know what they're thinking. You know that they love you. You know them so well that sometimes silence is just a beautiful thing. And the notion of a romantic encounter, we're past that. Cynthia's parents visited in January and Christmas time. What time is it?
It's past 10:12.
Okay, I'm almost done.
It's 12 o'clock.
Okay. Cynthia's parents visited in December and January for 5 weeks. And her father's 91, and he has dentures and diabetes and a walker. His mom is 70, her mom is 76, and she spends her whole day taking care of him, grinding up his food in a blender, making sure he has his insulin shots, giving him vitamin supplements, clearing a path for him as he walks from one room to another. And I've known them for almost 30 years. And to see them married together inspires me. I maybe saw them hold hands once in 5 weeks, and it was probably when they were praying at the dinner table. So what I call romance and what our popular culture calls romance, gone. It's almost non-existent. And yet, there's this sense when you're with them of a deep, deep love and care that they have for one another. And the romance is past. It's not important. Was it at one point? Absolutely. And so, I want to leave you with this morning. In the words of David, Psalm 16, consistently, right from top to bottom, keep me safe, O God, for in you I take refuge. You alone are my portion and my cup. My eyes are always on you. You make known to me the path of life. Don't romance God. Maybe let him romance you. Maybe that's the way we need to think about this. Don't look for those high times, those great moments, and go, why don't I have more of those? Why can't that happen to me? Why can't I experience God in this incredible way like this person? Maybe we need to stop looking for those moments. When they come along, jump for joy. Embrace them. But let's look for God in the simplicity of a quiet conversation, in the beauty of a smile on a young child that we don't even know. Let's have an eye for God. Let's have an ear for him in everything that we do. Let me pray with you. Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of Scripture. And in Psalm 16, we just see it all through the psalm. Again and again, the methodical simplicity and evenness and consistency of David's words. He sees you and hears you everywhere, all the time. Give us the humbleness. Give us the pace of life. Give us the desire to seek that out in the world, in the life that you have given us. In your name we pray. Amen.